रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम।
रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम।
सीताराम सीताराम, भज प्यारे तू सीताराम।
सीताराम सीताराम, भज प्यारे तू सीताराम।
ईश्वर अल्लाह तेरे नाम, सबको सन्मति दे भगवान।
ईश्वर अल्लाह तेरे नाम, सबको सन्मति दे भगवान।
रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम।
रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम।
सीताराम सीताराम, भज प्यारे तू सीताराम।
सीताराम सीताराम, भज प्यारे तू सीताराम।
ईश्वर अल्लाह तेरे नाम, सबको सन्मति दे भगवान।
ईश्वर अल्लाह तेरे नाम, सबको सन्मति दे भगवान।
रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम।
रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम।
सीताराम सीताराम, भज प्यारे तू सीताराम।
सीताराम सीताराम, भज प्यारे तू सीताराम।
ईश्वर अल्लाह तेरे नाम, सबको सन्मति दे भगवान।
ईश्वर अल्लाह तेरे नाम, सबको सन्मति दे भगवान।
रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम।
रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम। रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम। रघुपति राघव राजा राम, पतित पावन सीताराम।
Thank you for joining me. My name is Sarojini, and I'm the host of Caribbean Connections. You just heard a beautiful bhajan, which was submitted by my dear friend here, Ramnarine Sahadeo, aka Ramji. I know a lot of people know you as Ram or Ramji Ram. So the name of this bhajan, for those of you I know who are very interested, it is called Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram. So today on the program, we have a very old friend of mine for at least 2 decades. Ramnarine Sahadeo. And I'll give you a little history on Ramji, but he'll delve into it a little more. Uh, Ramji was born in Guyana, formerly British Guyana, and his dad, Jahaji, died when he was just 1 year old, leaving behind his widowed mother in a rural agricultural community to fend for herself and six infant children. Ramji, this would have been very difficult for everyone growing up in such a rural community. Can you give us a little synopsis on what it was like growing up in Guyana and this Hindu community that meant so much to you?
Yes, thank you for having me, Sarojini. It's a pleasure to be joining you again. Uh, what's important about my childhood is that it was village life. And I think if there is anything you're looking for perfection in any social organization, community, I believe it's village life. And that's the impression my childhood had on me. Whatever difficulties we had, we also had a lot of freedom, a lot of responsibility. In my own family, my mother could not read and write, but she remained a widow for 50 years. So my father died very young. I was 1 year old. There were six children. My eldest brother was about 14. He's still alive and living in Malton in Mississauga, Ontario. And he took responsibility of the family along with my eldest sister. Fortunately, my father had bought a lot of land. They were very skilled in saving. And there were some times when the estates went under and there was few people who had money. They bought a lot of land. So my father left us with the land. We had cattle, we had sheep, goat, all kinds of poultry. But we also had neighbors and a community that looked after each other. So while I still think it was the best years of my life, no matter how difficult it was. And I still dream of the village people helping out each other, sharing and caring for each other. Even though we didn't have electricity, we didn't have running water, etc., etc. But still, it's indelible in memory.
As a little boy, and there were six children in the family. So did everybody have like a little task, a little chore to do to help your mom out raising everybody?
Yes, definitely. My mother was the first woman in the village who milked cows.
Wow.
She had lots of cows, and she was the first one to do that as a widow. My job was to clean the cow pen, make sure I walk the cattle to the pasture in the morning before I go to school, which was about a mile away. But that is so beautiful. It's just in the mouth of the Atlantic Ocean.
Yes.
And everybody, my eldest sister, occasionally before I started primary school, I was on her bicycle going to sewing lessons with her. I had to be with her because there was nobody home. But there was a lot of freedom. Everybody had responsibility. And I think that was one of the greater things. The duties and the responsibility everybody carried out.
Absolutely. I think some people, not all of this younger generation, can learn from this, coming together as a family, doing chores, building a community life, and at the same time, strengthening the family bond. Right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to fast forward a little bit here because we've got so much to talk about. So no disrespect to you. You left Guyana first to study in California, USA. Then you came to Canada to study law. So I'll have you tell us more. So when did you leave Guyana? And please elaborate on this for us, enlighten us.
Well, I left Guyana in '69. My first job in Guyana was in '64. That tells you my age. I was a young teacher because I had a few subjects GC. And at that time, the country was experiencing a lot of violence, racial violence. It was just before independence. And I started teaching at what we call a bottom house school because the villages were divided racially and the violence prevented the children from crossing certain areas. Because historically, most of the schools were settled in areas because of the Christian run schools before that. And in '64, we were just trying to start getting rid of that so that the government would run the schools totally. After that, I went to work with the public service, and I left because I saw the writings on the wall. I left in '69, and after working with government for a while, a few years, things were happening that was clearly discriminatory, and it was a very crucial part in the country's history. I didn't know where I was going. I had friends in the States. They says, come over. I went over, and then I stayed in New York for 2 months because I was admitted to a school that I never attended. I had an uncle in California. He says, what are you doing there? I says, okay, come on over in California. And I remember distinctly asking him, I says, how can I get to New York from California? I don't have a visa. And he said, you need a visa to come to California. You're already in the States. And I finished university there. '71, I went back to Guyana in '72 and stayed there for 6 weeks, miserable weeks. They were trying to get me a job at the public service and the foreign service. I was already admitted to the law school in Guyana, which they had first-year law school here, then they do the other years in the Caribbean. But it was miserable weeks in the sense that you dreamt of the friends, of the family, and so on. But I had changed, and so did the society, and so did the people.
And your mom was still around, of course.
My mother was still around, yes.
But she must have been happy to have her son back for a little bit, correct?
Oh, there was no doubt about it. She didn't want me to leave. When I went back, she was very happy. So at that time, though, people were starting to leave. Generally, by '71, '72, other people were trying to leave the country because it had gone through that difficult period of experimenting with socialism or communism, whatever people define it as. And there were a lot of hardships.
I know.
Especially for Indians, their food, their diet, everything. You couldn't get flour, basic stuff, and so on, which was, their meals.
Correct. Wow. Now, you eventually left Guyana once more, but this time you came to Canada, right? So what was the driving force or the stimulus for you to finally leave, come to Canada where you studied law? And what sort of memorable experiences you think or you feel you had going back and then bringing that with you to Canada?
Again, I didn't know where I was going. I had friends in Canada, or relatives actually. I just wrote to them in those days to meet me at the airport, and that was it. You take it for granted that family and friends help each other. And I can never overemphasize what people did for each other and how that extended family still helped and played a large part in my practice as a lawyer. When I came to Canada, I worked for about 3 years in factories and so on, different things.
And were you, Toronto first? That used to be the main port of entry.
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
I was in Toronto. Friends were coming every weekend. People were deserting them. One time I had about 17 people staying with me in a 2-bedroom apartment.
Wow.
But the motivation was the immigration ran through the house and behaved in a very uncouth manner.
Mm.
And I called what was a little law office, community law office, described what happened, and they says they overstepped their bounds. And I got motivation from that incident to go to law school.
Mm. Oh, wow. So again, we're going to fast forward a little bit. You've actually practiced law for almost 4 decades. Wow, Ramji. I think some of our listeners are even much half the same. Half of these decades. Now, it was a very rewarding career because we met back in the 80s through the Ontario Society for Services to Indo-Caribbean Canadians. Many of us sharing the same values, and we had the same state of mind. So I know a lot, or a little more than maybe you might even know about your career there. So, Ramji, you've actually practiced law for almost 4 decades. And, I met you when you were actually still practicing through the Ontario Society of Services to Indo-Caribbean Canadians, which many of us share the same interests and values in promoting Indo-Caribbean culture and so on. And I know that you've had a very rewarding career, but you've also stated in your book that justice systems would need fewer resources if residents can just avoid lust, anger, and greed, for these vices clog the courts with expensive, unpredictable, and unnecessary litigation. I found these were very powerful words, and which I know from speaking with you earlier may have actually contributed to your exit out of law. So, can you elaborate more on this for us, please?
Yes, I do remember OSIC, and I do remember you were the first female president, I think, and maybe
Yes,
the only one.
yes, correct.
Yeah, my involvement with OSIC, it was a community-based organization that lots of refugees from Guyana, which has less than 1 million people, uh, had produced more refugee claimants than any other country in the world coming to Canada. Unbelievable. So there was a lot of uncertainty there. But my comment with respect to the justice systems and the courts um, merely reflect the experience in criminal law and family law, which is at the very end of my career in law.
Mhm.
Because referring to Mahatma Gandhi, he was not a very good lawyer in court. He always tried to settle stuff, and he did most of his work outside court in terms of resolution and so on. I
Mhm.
think that is still where we ought to be. Because look at the present time, what is the biggest concern with COVID is that we're clogging up our hospitals.
Mhm.
And if we clog up our hospitals, then where would people get emergency treatment for other things like heart attack and so on? Certainly we need the courts. There will always be disputes. But especially in family law, I think we had an old system of panchayat where the
Mhm.
extended family or an elder or so on will get together and resolve some disputes. And regretfully, too, at the end of my career, I've been seeing some expensive legal bills from people who are just angry with each other, who came into Canada maybe just like you and me 20, 30 years ago without a penny, because somebody paid for their passage. And just like me, they came and they stayed with somebody's home. And within 30 years, because of the country, the system we live in, they had amassed a lot of money,
Mhm.
lots of property, but they're wasting it because of lust, anger, and greed.
Mhm.
What gets
So,
you into criminal court except, anger?
mhm.
And which
Yeah.
one of us have made a good decision when we were angry?
Mhm.
And these are
Now,
the basic stuff that I think can help the system.
absolutely. And I mean, I haven't spent much time in law, but I do have family members who are. Of course, you are practicing different litigations, but it'll lead me to my next question then. What do you feel was the best part about being a lawyer?
I think I would again reflect on the fact that I used my knowledge to help people that I knew from childhood, friends, family, people I grew up with, and to give them a new lease or a new country, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And based on that, I would say, that it's very meaningful. It was not just a profession where you make a living.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the people were so lonely, sometimes we had to get boyfriend and girlfriends for them. Sometimes we had to get places for them to stay. We had to get, who's gonna get a job for them. This was a little different from just practicing law because of the community. I never advertised. People were referring each other. In fact,
Wow.
some of the lawyers had so many clients, they couldn't serve them properly, and some of them got into trouble because of the volume.
Mm-hmm. So you actually went way beyond being a lawyer. You talked about actually helping people in their personal lives outside of law, right? From what I gather here.
Of course, we had to, because that's a community in which we grew up in. Those
Mm-hmm.
values had not changed just because we came to another country.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, that's how I met you at OSIC, because you were looking for community support for people
Mm-hmm.
who otherwise would have lost their claims. In fact, uh, it will be too lengthy, but the process, if everybody had to go and prove that they're a refugee, most would have lost because of their inability to express themselves, not
Mm-hmm.
because there were no problems, and because of the way the system worked.
Exactly. So I could see in your book you really stress the fact of how the community back home in Guyana, how that really helped shape your life and your values. And it's really good to hear that coming to Canada and practicing law, you didn't forget about that. And I certainly hope, many people listening will realize you don't have to escape those values in order to get ahead in your career. You could marry the two together or more than one, right? Now, the
Absolutely,
next, sorry,
absolutely, yes.
absolutely. So then the flip coin then. What is the worst part about being a lawyer, or what was the worst part that you feel about being a lawyer?
Something I wasn't prepared for was it's a business. You have to deal with money. You have to pay bills. You have to, get secretary and clerks and so on. Um, I would have preferred that I didn't have to deal with that aspect of it, because we were also dealing with people, remember, who came in the country without money. So gradually, most of my cases by the end of my career was legal aid, either as duty counsel or people who had a legal aid certificate, because I didn't like to deal with the money aspect. If they have a legal aid certificate, you do the same work, but legal aid pays the lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
and the client still choose the lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Absolutely.
so that aspect of it. The other aspect culturally was what I call a paper chase. I like many other lawyers was running from the paper. I started doing real estate. It was a lot of paper. I didn't like that, and then I started doing immigration. It was very few papers. Then it started becoming voluminous. And I think throughout my career, I must have helped to destroy some trees by producing paper that nobody read.
Wow. Yeah, yeah. Well, thank God here we are virtually, and thank God for the digital age that we don't need to print off every single thing that comes into us. Many people read things online. So I think we're compensating for that now, right?
We're recognizing it thanks to people like Gandhi.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to move into the hot topic for today. We're going to move right into your book now. And I'm sure many folks have been waiting very patiently. So, and I'll hold up your book here just for our audience to see. Pardon all my markings and markers if they can see it here. So, your book today, Mohandas K. Gandhi, Thoughts, Words, Deeds, and His Inspiration, the Bhagavad-Gita. This is actually the first edition of the book came out to mark the 10th anniversary of the atrocities of September 11, 2001. And now we have this beautiful second edition here, and later on we'll let people know how they can get a copy. So I have a burning question for you. Why did you decide to write this book in the first place?
I think we're still at that part of the world history where there's a distinction between East and West in terms of values and the way we do things. The media, all aspects of the media. 10 years after September 11, 2001, they were only saying 9/11. Even nowadays, you will still hear it. They're saying 9/11. They're not saying 9/11, 2001. If you allow that to continue, it's assumed that these who perpetrated these atrocities, all the 9/11s in life belong to them. And we can't let that happen because there are other 9/11s in life, which, as I said, can make a distinction between the East and the West. The one in 2001 is certainly violent. So many innocent lives were lost. And you can ask yourself whether they achieved their purpose, whatever it was. But then we go back to other 9/11s like 1893 and 1906, both of which were initiatives to solve injustice, but by peaceful means. If you look at Gandhi's life, you will see that the people that he opposed, like General Smuts in South Africa, the British, they're all his friends now. They did not become enemies. Gandhi has more parks and statutes and organizations in England itself, more than Winston Churchill, his adversary at that time.
Wow.
So it's what lasts, and it is when you do something by peaceful means and persuading other people on your side, it has a more lasting effect. It produces, better results.
Absolutely. In part 2 of this book, the second edition, you stated that the Bhagavad-Gita, which means the Song of the Lord, an introduction by the great Mahatma. What would you like to share with us about this great book? And I know there is so much to say, but if you were to pick a few things from the Bhagavad-Gita, what would you like to share with our listeners today?
We mentioned 3 words with reference to the quotes: lust, anger, and greed. We also mentioned nonviolence, Hisba. All those words come from the Bhagavad-Gita. They weren't invented by Gandhi. It is just the Gita also was around long before Jesus Christ. But, Gandhi's life can be more appreciated if we look at how he changed. When he was born in India, parents all very religious, went to England, never read the Bhagavad-Gita. He studied the Bible there, he learned how to dance and so on. He was trying to learn how to dance. But two Englishmen introduced him to the Bhagavad-Gita. He loved the Sermon on the Mount. He studied the Bible very well. But when he was introduced to the Bhagavad-Gita, and he was embarrassed that he didn't read it before, when the two Englishmen said, "This is your book, you know, you got to read it." And after that, he started practicing it and living it more than any other person that I know. It's the ability to practice it. Because we have lots of teachers non-stop in all the religions. When you can live what you preach, you're closer to the Mahatma.
Absolutely. And in your book there, I love quotes myself, and I know in parts of this book you have a lot of great quotations by the Mahatma. There's even a section in your book here. I think it's about page 167 or so, where there are quotations that you have listed there about the great Mahatma. And you just talked about the Sermon on the Mount. And of course, the Beatitudes are there. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And that is also on page 165. The section I'm referring to in your book, quotes from Mahatma. It's on here, I'm showing page 156, and it states quotes from Mahatma Gandhi. And there is one that really struck me because of our connection in helping the community. And I'd like you to enlighten us with this quote. It says, "The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others."
Yes, in that same area of the book, you will also see the universality of the Golden Rule in about 20 religions. And all of them say about the same thing, and they're all books that refer to that. So that's something is a universality that we come to when we say you lose yourself in service to others. We have different words in different religions. We have charity, we have zakat for Muslim friends, we have sewa for the Hindus. And it's also defined in the book, in the Gita, what sewa means and who to help when and so on. So it essentially comes down to, if you serve humanity, you're serving God. And no matter what religion you are, what community you go, and that is how you will find yourself. Because you look inside, look what you have done for others, and this is where you will find a very meaningful life, irrespective of your background.
Yeah, and in your book too, and I read, and I had known this also, that Gandhi, he read the Bible, just as you mentioned. And do you think that, you know, reading the Bible, the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, and then, of course, his Bhagavad-Gita, do you think he really did see the similarities between Christians and non-Christians, whether you're Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, Jain, whomever? And there is a quote also that you have there, and it says, Gandhi said one time, "I like your Christ, but I don't like your Christians." So knowing what you and I know from the book and what you know from all your teachings and knowledge and readings, what do you think he meant by that?
Gandhi was initially just fighting in South Africa for the rights of Indians, whether they were indentured servants or businessmen. As he moved and learned about more and more injustices in life, he recognized that the whole of the British Empire had certain value systems that has to be changed. The whole civilization. If you look at history, you will find this hegemony where the colonialists, they went to various countries to conquer and to exploit, but they took with them their religion, which essentially all these third world nations are suffering from today. Gandhi was quite, respected all religions, and he made it very clear that there were a lot of Christians who don't follow their own teachings. No doubt about it. If we look at our present fiasco in Canada, what is happening to these unmarked graves of Native children?
Yeah.
Look how stark an example that is of misapplication of religious principles. And there has been that throughout. And he made it clear, that there's good people in all religions. And the conversion that he objected to, that's where he drew the line. That don't use all your trappings and so on to convert me. The conversion that you need is to make a Hindu a better Hindu, a Christian a better Christian, a Muslim a better Muslim, and so on. Because that's where he drew the line. And he had friends in every religion. He understood them all, but that's where he drew the line. And unfortunately, some of that is still going on.
Unfortunately, and I know a lot of people living in Canada, or even a lot of expatriates, Canadians living abroad. It's certainly a very sad and tragic time in our history. And today we are all trying to render the situation and redeem ourselves. But as you know, we can't eliminate the past and history. The word satyagraha means resistance through mass civil disobedience based upon the foundation of non-violence. What can you tell us about the Satyagraha struggle of 1906 in South Africa, correct?
That's correct. That was at the Empire Theatre in Johannesburg in South Africa. Again, that's September 11th. So 1906. So here we are fighting a lot of injustice, and the Indians had to get identity cards and so on to be registered, and that was one of the injustices we were fighting against. So they had gathered a very big meeting at the theater, and I think the theater burnt down the next day. So there was maybe some significance, but he had the people there, and they were discussing how to approach this in a non-violent manner. There were many words that they were trying to coin, and finally they came up with satyagraha. It means the force of truth. You will have to speak the truth. You will suffer, but you will not back down. You will keep going, but do it non-violently. And as I mentioned before, the results are much more lasting, and even General Smuts respected Gandhi in the end. If you look at South Africa, Mandela, when he was a young lawyer, and when he was charged, it's because he was involved in violence. Mandela, after he was in prison, recognized that was not going to work. When he came out, that was his biggest challenge, to do changes in South Africa by non-violent means. And that is how they got also the late Bishop Tutu. That is how they got global support. Had they been involved in violence, I think it would have alienated a lot of people. So Gandhi's Satyagraha started there, and then he kind of fine-tuned it as he came to India and started being involved in the struggle for independence.
Absolutely. Well, Ramji, we're going to take a very quick break so we can have a sip of our delicious water here, and we will be right back. Stay with us, folks. Don't go away. We'll be right back to speak with Ramnarine Sahadeo about his book, Mohandas K. Gandhi, Thoughts, Words, Deeds, and his inspiration, the Bhagavad-Gita.
नम्रता के सम्राट दीन भंगी की हीन कुटिया के निवासी गंगा यमुना और गोदावरी के जलों से सिंचित इस सुंदर देश में तुझे सब जगह खोजने में हमें मदद दे, हमें ग्रहणशीलता और खुला दिल दे, तेरी अपनी नम्रता दे, तेरी अपनी नम्रता दे। भारत की जनता से एक रूप होने की शक्ति और उत्कंठा दे, शक्ति और उत्कंठा दे। हे भगवन तभी मदद के लिए आता है जब मनुष्य शून्य बनकर तेरी शरण लेता है। हमें वरदान दे, हमें वरदान दे कि सेवक और मित्र के नाते जिस जनता की हम सेवा करना चाहते हैं उससे कभी अलग ना पड़ जाए, कभी अलग ना पड़ जाए। हमें त्याग भक्ति और नम्रता की मूर्ति बना ताकि इस देश को हम ज्यादा समझें और ज्यादा चाहें। हमें वरदान दे, हमें वरदान दे, हे भगवन, हे भगवन, हे
Welcome back, folks. We have in here in our virtual studio with us Ramnarine Sahadeo, the author of his second edition of the book Mohandas K. Gandhi, Thoughts, Words, Deeds, and his inspiration, the Bhagavad-Gita. And here we are. Okay, Ramji, we're going to continue here, and I'm going to start this second segment here with another quotation which really gets us talking. And it says, and this is a quote by Gandhi as well, if we are to teach real peace in this world, and if we are to carry on a real war, we shall have to begin with the children. Can you enlighten us on this and what it really means?
Yeah, we discussed before how all our childhood affects us, the community in which we live and so on, the values that we bring to our adult life. If, for example, you have to teach me as a lawyer all the professions now, they have some upgrading course in ethics. If you're going to teach me ethics in my 30s and 40s, it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
Have to teach it at very, very early age. And that I think we can all appreciate in the communities in which we grow up, all these villages and third world countries and so on. Have you ever heard a mother tell a child must go and steal or go and lie? I don't think so. No matter how poor they are,
No.
somebody will caution them. I mean, we even got spanking. But we have world leaders now blatantly lying. We had a recent example in the States and still ongoing. We had in Guyana recently, our homeland, where we were born, an election, and people are still saying that that's not true. It didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to reconcile what these leaders are doing with what maybe they were not taught in childhood.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, how do we solve problems? The children, most of them are subject to bullying by other children. We have to teach them how to respect nature, how to respect animals and people from different cultures. Because the world is becoming more interdependent. It's like a global village, as they said a while ago, the word that they coined, and they have to learn how to appreciate everybody's culture, everybody's history, everybody's religion, and so on, and sharing. So if you can teach the children that, we can avoid a lot of problems in adulthood when they become leaders.
Absolutely, yeah. President Barack Obama, in his 2010 address to a joint session of the Parliament of India, in response to the question, who was the one person, living or dead, that he would choose to dine with, the president stated that it would be Gandhi. He stated that Gandhi changed the world just by the power of his ethics. How do you feel about these words coming from the President Barack Obama?
It's coming from a person in authority, a person with wisdom, and who will probably go down in history as one of the better presidents of the United States. I think you forget to mention one part, which is he says it will be a very small dinner because Gandhi doesn't eat too much.
Yes, that is correct. I did read that. Yeah. Yes.
But I think what he was doing there, he was connecting Gandhi to Martin Luther King and the movement in the States that that started. King was in India for quite a few months and learned a lot about nonviolence. And when he came back, the civil rights movement that he led, all led to Barack Obama's presidency. You know, it can be traced to that.
Yes.
And again, ethics is so important because here was Gandhi in a no position of authority. The only authority he had was look at my life, look at my example, look at my ethics. Because he was never president or prime minister on any of the, you know, any of the power positions.
There is another statement that Gandhi made that really struck me, and I want you to tell me what he was trying to tell the world. A few people asked him, Gandhiji, why don't you travel third class? And all he answered was, because there's no fourth class. What do you think he was trying to convey to all of us? What was the message behind these simple words coming from a simple man who eventually toppled one of the greatest empires of the world without violence?
The changes in his life are remarkable. At that point, when he made a statement like that, he was living like the poorest of the poor. He dressed, when he started dressing the way he did, um, he recognized that's how the very poor dressed. I think, if I remember well, it was Tamil or somewhere in the south there where he was to attend a meeting, and then he saw how the people dressed, and he dressed like that. But if you look at the book also, you will see the changes that went through in his dress. He started
Yes.
at the first paragraph, you will see him with his nice shirt and tie and suit and so on. And at the very end, he was almost without clothes. When he
Mm-hmm.
died, for example, you will see how few his material possessions were.
Mm-hmm.
And if you recall the incident in the train in South Africa, he insisted that I have a first class ticket. I booked my ticket. I'm a barrister. I am so and so. Until he realized that doesn't mean much. And he
Mm-hmm.
was thrown off the train.
Yes. Yes.
Um, so that is what he was saying. He would live like the very, very poor. And that's what he learned. When he dressed, he was dressed. He went to England, I think. Churchill's call him a half-naked fakir. But he says, the king was having enough clothes for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
And he went to England in a very cold weather, dressed with his shawl and his sandals. And I think he took his goat too.
Oh my. And yes, in your book, I do see that you showed pictures of when he was a lawyer in the law firm in South Africa and the changes as we go along the book. We saw his clothing became less and less. Um, Everyone has heard this term, the sun never sets on the British Empire. And in your book, you mentioned that this is so because it had colonies from the Caribbean to the South Pacific where indentured laborers were sent to replace slaves on the plantation. Hence, the Vedic values also traveled to countries like the Fijis, Sri Lanka, Burma, South Africa, and Mauritius. So, do you really feel that the influence of these values certainly came about from the British having the indentured laborers come to the countries that they colonized, and these values were spread, and eventually many stayed there?
Yes, of course. The British um has done a lot of harm to these countries. One of them, as you mentioned before, was just depriving people of their language, their culture, their religion in some places, because as the flag went with the religion. Ever since Constantinople was converted in the Roman Empire, religion and state became one. That is changing now. In Canada, we have a Supreme Court decision saying the state should be neutral in matters of religion. But that was not historically the situation in these countries. And but you just can't send a man and say, look, go and work, replace the slaves, go work on the sugar plantations, and that's all we need from you. A man is much more than that. Because when they went down, they took their culture with them. Some have survived, uh, like Guyana, Trinidad, and so on, because of other reasons, including the volume. But if you look at some of the other Caribbean countries, they may have physical features from India, but know very little or know nothing about
Mm.
their culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that has happened throughout not just the British Empire, the other colonial masters did the same thing. The Spanish, the Portuguese, um, the French, because there were various parts from India that had all of these cultures and different languages. In Mauritius, for example, was one of the first places they went to in 1834. Guyana, the first place in the south or the west in 1838. But we have also countries like with French, and they still try to hold on to their language, and they practice a little differently. But they took the values with them, and gradually we're becoming more and more now aware of those values. In fact, they're even rewriting the history of India. I am now involved, in fact, with the Caribbean Examination Council so that they can teach properly and adequately the history of Indians, East Indians in the Caribbean, because there's a lot of sordid history there. But now it is time to bring out the facts. No matter how bitter they are, the children should learn it. And the same thing in India, because India, you know, I just read an article the other day, everything is in English, everything in English, Supreme Court decisions, the Constitution, everything. And that started with the British Empire.
Yes, yes. You have stated in your book that leaders of political and social movements throughout the world had Gandhi's writings and lifestyle to rely on in the struggles to improve their own people. For example, and you mentioned anti-apartheid icon Nelson Mandela, Bishop Desmond Tutu, former Polish President Walisa, former Zambian President Kenneth Kanuta, and Bangladeshi Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus. In fact, Mandela reminded us that Gandhi's Satyagraha began in Johannesburg, which you mentioned earlier on, and it has been stated that with respect to the ending of white rule in South Africa, it has been stated that Mandela finished what Gandhi started. Ramji, there's a lot here that I just mentioned. How do you feel about some of these leaders whose name I've just mentioned here, relying on Gandhi's writings and lifestyle to carry on this legacy?
I think they all recognize the method of nonviolence, and they practice it. Those are only some of the few people that have practiced what they learned from him. And it is quite significant because they're universal values that has lasting results. I mentioned how Mandela changed, you know, in his approach, and the support that he received. Because initially, though Gandhi was just fighting for the rights of the Indian laborers from India in South Africa, he showed how very powerful forces can be defeated. And I think if I read some of my writings from my other friends adequately, he might have gone overboard, because many of these countries were not ready for independence. But because he showed them how you can bring down the British Empire, the greatest empire on earth, just by nonviolent means, everybody started clamoring for independence. And some of these countries right now are still struggling with the divisions that resulted from running into this new step in their history without really being prepared for all the ramifications. When we had the British as or any colonial power as a foreign enemy, it was easy to unite. Once that had disappeared, we started getting all kind of local divisions. which continue to haunt some of these countries.
Mhm.
Guyana is only one of them.
Mhm. Absolutely. Um, Mentioning the positive 9/11s, which we talked about earlier, this date, September 11, 1893, a positive day in history, you said. North America was first introduced to the unifying potential of the Gita's universal message. Can you explain more about this positive date in history and this universal message from the Gita?
That was the day that Swami Vivekananda had attended the Parliament of World Religions and spoke, and his famous opening statement was Sisters and Brothers of America. Uh, and he had a very loud applause. And he was not even scheduled to speak at that conference because they had religious leaders from all over the world, very prominent people. But that was the first time the message of the East was actually delivered to the West. And he spoke about, at that time, India, the history was that they received people from all cultures, all religions, and they settled in India. And also, he was talking about the Bhagavad-Gita, which is that people were looking for a religion where everybody can be involved. Regretfully, he thought at that time, because of the people in attendance, the leaders and so on, that all of this religious discrimination and so on would stop. Unfortunately, it has not, even to this day.
Yes.
But that is a 9/11 that is of great significance and a positive date in history.
Yes, and we mentioned earlier that we have so many positive things that happen on 9/11, or however popularly known as 9/11 now, the incidents we all watched in disbelief, and the horrific things that went on September 11, 2001. But I think it's wonderful that you can teach all of us and show us, for those of us who didn't know, there are many other things way back in history that happened in a positive way on 9/11. So we can all take the date and move forward positively with that. So thank you for that, Ramji. We're going to switch gears a little bit here, but staying true to our tribute to the great Mahatma. In 2017, you actually established the Mahatma Gandhi Scholarship at McMaster University in Ontario. The scholarship serves to promote the Gandhian concepts of nonviolence and help foster peace and nonviolence in the world. Can you elaborate on this for all interested and inquisitive minds out there?
Yes, there was a group in Hamilton, Ontario, where McMaster University is located. They started the Gandhi Peace Festival in 1993, and every year they have been doing it. It's a cooperation with the city of Hamilton, the India-Canada Society of Hamilton, the Center for Peace Studies in the university, and the university itself. Professor Mara Singh was one of those who initiated it. I got in touch with them, and because of the book, they got in touch with me, and I suggested to them that there should be a Mahatma Gandhi scholarship because not many students know of Mahatma Gandhi already. You know, it is just unfortunate. Einstein said the day will come when people don't believe this man actually lived. And that date is already upon some of us, because you will find many university students, if you ask them who was Mahatma Gandhi, what he did, many of them would not know. So the
my,
scholarship
yeah.
was a way of, it was an initiative of mine. So you put a certain amount of money down to get it started, but they were so happy with it, they started to promote it, and now anybody can contribute, even Americans or Canadians. So far, we have 4 years of people who are awarded the scholarship, and they
Yeah,
come
I
from
saw
different
that
they come
here.
from different backgrounds. Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, they come from different backgrounds, but most of them is to um, they take peace studies, which is something that we all need to concentrate on. And the aim was to promote nonviolence, peace, and justice. One of the first speakers at that conference in 1993 was a leader of the original peoples. And this year, again, the uh, the theme was reconciliation, truth and reconciliation. They always recognized the land of that university was belonged to the native, and so we get that going. People will get a tax credit if you're a Canadian, for example. You can just write a check to McMaster University, and in the memo line, because there's so many scholarship, make sure you put Gandhi scholarship. The U.S. citizens also can donate, but the check has to be made payable to friends of McMaster. And again, the memo line will be Gandhi scholarship. But you can also go online and donate.
Yes, I noticed in the handout here that you sent to me, they can go to Mahatma Gandhi Scholarship. Like, what will be the website for them to go to? You have one site here, giving at mcmaster.ca. Now,
Yeah,
this website is this one just for questions, giving at mcmaster.ca. Is that one just for questions and answers, or?
no, there is a link right for the donation. And if
Okay,
you go to that link, it will already say Mahatma Gandhi Scholarship. So
great.
you just put in your name and amount and your address and so on, so you can get your tax receipt.
Thank you. And as you mentioned too, you provided the original funding to help establish the award, but it's so thrilling to see that the scholarship fund is currently at 50,883. Now, I don't know if in the last little while it has grown, but just to give folks an idea about what the recipients are studying from 2018 to 2021, most of them were studying peace science, peace studies and anthropology, political science, justice, political philosophy and law, English and cultural studies, and peace studies. And these are just some of the areas of studies that your recipients are involved in, unless you'd like to add some more to that, Ramji.
Yes, the peace studies is important. The recipients normally have to have like a minor or some courses in peace studies and do very well in it. We're hoping that we can have a team of people once they know something about Gandhi, about peace, nonviolence, and so on. Hopefully, they can go out and speak to the secondary schools, because that's where we get a lot of bullying and violence and so on, and they they're turning into the wrong path, so to speak. And
Absolutely.
you can show how nonviolence can be used to approach all their problems.
Um, we're gonna just we're gonna come back a little bit to the scholarship, but I know I'm looking at the time, and I know you've got a busy schedule too. But with respect as well, I know you are so thrilled to tell us about your visit to the ancestral land, India. And you actually went to your ancestral village of Varanasi, which is a spiritual city, and you visited ashrams. And I know our listeners do. Tell us about these experiences and how did you feel? What emotions were evoked, and how did your mental space of mind, being there, knowing that your ancestors actually left here and came all the way to Guyana, South America, and many other places around the world?
Yes, actually, my trip was itself a mystery. It was like a magic. I wrote an article on Vivekananda. I think it's 125th anniversary when he went to Chicago. I believe it's 2018. It was an article in their magazine. And somebody from Belgium called me one night and told me he loved the article. And I started discussing that, well, you know, my family comes from Varanasi. I'm going to go there soon. I booked hotel and passage and so on. And he says, no, 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 we will take care of you. You come. My father-in-law is the manager of the biggest yoga center that is going up in Varanasi.
Wow.
We started talking. He introduced me to people, and I went down. I spent about 5 weeks, but we went to the village with their help. The villages have changed. Was not able to find any ancestral links, but the village for sure was there, and I had that feeling because I grew up with cattle and so on, that the village was identical almost. The way people lived, no fence, or the cattle is right in the yard, these kind of things. I did not find any relatives, and I suspect because they did not have land. I think one of the easiest ways to trace your ancestry, if they have land, ancestral land, so it passes down from generation to generation. My ancestors was that group of people, I think, who had moved about, very poor. There was maybe famine and so on. And also because my grandfather, that's my mother's uncle, was born in Guyana, but went back with his parents to that same village after the indentureship was completed in Guyana. But they, at that time, which was about, I think it was about 1906, they went back. And they, at that time, couldn't find their relatives. So once I was armed with that, I didn't push it too much, because they came back on a second indentureship contract to Trinidad, and then where they found a brother, and then they came again to Guyana where they settled. But I was very fortunate also to visit the ashrams that Gandhi had set up when he had come from South Africa back. And there was also the university there in Ahmedabad, lovely area. But more importantly, my friends took me on the trail that led to the Salt March, and that was in 1930. That was the trip that I think shook the world. I went to the beach, Dandi Beach, where Gandhi had picked up salt from the Indian Ocean and says, "This is our birthright," and they started making salt. So those were great historical things. I'd love to go back, but I think before I go, I felt a little bit ashamed. I would like to learn Hindi or Sanskrit. It was very difficult. I was communicating with my companions through the cell phone. It had this interpreter saying, I speak in English, it will translate it to Hindi. They will speak in Hindi, translate it to English. But it was trying.
Yes, yes.
I really am now thinking if I go back, I must be able to speak one of the languages besides English.
Yeah. So Ramji, the Bollywood movies didn't come in handy. I'm sure you've seen your share of them.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. I mean, as many people know, Indian movies were very big in the Caribbean, including Guyana, and all I guess the popular words we all say today, we pick those up and, we interject them a little bit to kind of show people, oh yeah, I know a little bit of Hindi, right? But of course, Namaste is what I grew up hearing a lot of my aunties and uncles and friends saying. So it just was natural to me when I heard that, right? Do you think you were a little bit disappointed that you didn't find any relatives in Varanasi, which is now Banaras? Do you feel disappointed over that?
I don't. And the reason, as I said, is because they even couldn't find their relatives as early as 1906. For somebody who was born in 1897 in Guyana and then went back and so on, if they couldn't find them at that time, I wasn't that much disappointed. But that's from my mother's side. From my father's side, all the relatives have gone to Lucknow, which was my father's side, and they were able to trace that ancestry.
Very good.
But on the language thing, you see, India is just a mystery for
Yes.
us. I left with the idea that essentially I'm a Western man, regretfully, and there's lots to learn about India. You will go maybe a few hundred kilometers, you will find another culture and another language. So
Yes.
based on their own history, as I said, they also have a lot to go back to, that their history didn't start with the British invading or the East India Company. We're now going back thousands of years to see how this civilization survived. Only civilization, continuous civilization. Babylonia, Romans, Greeks, all have gone. And this one has stayed, and that is the secret that they still have to delve into and learn.
Yes.
They're now doing it.
When you do go back then, and I'm gathering you'd love to, what would be the one burning thing on your agenda this time? I know you said you plan to learn a language so you could communicate better. But now that you've gone and you've experienced so much, what would be the top of your list when you go back this time?
I'd like to explore there's some huge ancient temples in South India. When Vasco da Gama landed, that part of the beach I visited near that beach, where Vasco da Gama first landed. And then we had the Inquisition in Goa and so on. But they still did not touch a lot of the temples. And they have all some huge temples down there. I'd like to explore some of them and the history and so on. But as I said, I have to know. I like the Tamil area. I had lots of clients from Sri Lanka, and went to Goa. I went to Kerala. I went all the way south, where Vivekananda swam onto a rock before he came to the West in 1893. We call it Vivekananda's Rock. All of those are very precious areas. But also the area, there is an area where Ram was supposed to have crossed there and go over to Lanka to find Sita, who was captured by Ravan. And there is, I forgot the name of the place, but I also like to visit that area in Sri Lanka, the very closest to India. Ramji 2 Bridge, I think it is called, because the satellites have seen the structure under the water, and it was not something that's a fiction. That the bridge was there.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. So you certainly have a reason to go back, Ramji.
Yes, I'd like to immerse myself in the culture. It's only I can get rid of some of my Western
Yes,
values.
yes, I know. And I guess this gives us an idea how difficult at first it must have been for Gandhiji to move away from his fancy suit and tie, being in the lawyer mode, and moving over to just a loin cloth and a piece of cloth draped over him with his cane. That took a lot of guts, a lot of will, a lot of power, and I think most of all, a lot of beliefs, correct? To realize I don't need all this fancy clothes to be who I want to be. And as you said, he was dressed well, almost like an Englishman, and he was still thrown off the train. So, what does it matter to wear a loincloth and spread what you believe in and the word of nonviolence?
Yeah. One thing that impressed me about India was I was forced to look inside myself. I don't know if you ever heard about sleeper trains and sleeper buses. You go on a bus, or I spent about 17 hours on a bus going from Bangalore to Kerala, and nothing except a small bed and a glass of water, no food, nothing else,
Wow.
nothing to plug in. It's just me and me alone. And I thought to myself, I remembered a saying that if you're alone and you're depressed, you're in bad company. So I started thinking how I can improve my company, and I had to really think about that. You might have seen them in the movies, the sleeper buses and the sleeper trains, where you just go double bunk, and
Yes.
the poorest people travel like that. There's also air
Wow.
condition, where you can go on an air conditioned
Mhm.
bus or train and have a luxurious travel.
Yes.
Uh,
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for that, Ramji. Just moving back over to the scholarship, to reiterate that anyone who donates, they will be able to get a tax credit, and folks from within Canada and the States can also donate. And I mean, even if you go to the McMaster University website, I'm sure there might be a link to that scholarship, right? And this given at mcmaster.ca too, everybody would have a link if they're interested in donating to the scholarship, correct?
that's correct. Yeah. In
Okay.
fact, I'd like to say that the book was published 10 years after about 2011, the first one, and most of the proceeds are going towards a scholarship. Some friends
Okay.
are taking a whole set, like a box, and then the funds are going towards the scholarship, and they give the book away to people who will appreciate Gandhi and the Bhagavad-Gita and the
Mhm.
universality of the Golden Rule and the Sermon on the Mount and the speeches of 9/11, 1906, and 1893 are all in there.
Yes, I noticed that. And when we were in Toronto recently in the fall for a family wedding, one of your dear friends brought by about 10 for me. And I think I'm only down to about 3 books now. And as you mentioned, give them away to friends, family as Christmas gifts, birthday gifts, or you can just contribute to the book. You can keep a few and pass them around to various libraries and things like that, which what I plan to do once we're in a safer position from this variant. Ramji, I know for time, we can certainly go on more and talk about the book and the great Mahatma, but I do want to thank you very much for your time. I want to thank you for the books, for enlightening me and our audience. Thank you so much. It was certainly a wonderful discussion. And I'm going to give you the last word. What is our takeaway from this chat today?
Namaste. It was a good 2 hours and a pleasure speaking to you about something that can benefit the whole world. You know, we have many theories. We went through history, capitalism, feudalism, communism, socialism, and the answer in the end is what serves humanity best. We're looking for the best kind of a system, the best society, and I think the village system is, for me, the best, where people care for each other. And Gandhi recognized that. Gandhi realized that India was nothing more than a village system. And what all he had done, you know, to started all this independence in the villages where they're self-sufficient. I hope one day, but while I think about my childhood and think about those villages, I have to conclude that Canada is home. Canada has really opened its arms to people all over the world. If we can try to improve Canada by practicing some of the principles of the Mahatma, and we can still reach out and help all of those villages and countries from which we originated.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ramji, and namaste. And when you do go back to India again, think about all of us and bring back many more stories for us as well.
Namaste. COVID rules for the present time.
Exactly. Namaste, Ramji.
Thank you.
वैष्णव जन तो तेरे कहिए जे पीर पराई जाने रे वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीर पराई जाने रे
वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीर पराई
सकल लोक मान सहने वंदे सकल लोक मान सहने वंदे निंदा ना करे के नीरे
निंदा न करे के नीरे वाच काच मना निश्चल राखे धन धन जनानी देनी रे वैष्णव जनता तेने कहिए जे पीर पराई जाने रे वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीर पराई जाने रे
दुखे उपकारे करे कोई manhabiman ane re
सकळ लोकमा सहोणे वंदे
निंदा न करे के नीरे जीवा थकिय सत्य न बोले भर धन नव ज्वले हाथ रे
वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीर बराई जाने रे
वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीर बराई जाने रे
वैष्णव जन तो
तेने कहिए जे महामाया व्यापी नहीं जेने दृढ़ वैराग्य जेनो मन मारे
रामानमाशु तामिलागी सकला तीरता तेरा तारा मारे
वैष्णव जन तो तेनी कहिए जे पीर पराई जानी रे पर तुमका उपकार करे तो ये मानविमान नान रे
वनलोपिने kapaterahice ce kamakrara nivarare
भाणे न रसयुठेनु दर्शन करता खुड़ाई को तेरे थार्या रे
वैष्णव जन तो तेरे कहिए जे पीर बराई